2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10.
What's the date today? October.
I think it's the
24th?
25th, but I'm not sure. Maybe it's the 26th. This laptop will tell you.
Okay. Or your phone, let's see.
Mine's upstairs being charged.
Oh, no. All right. So, this is October 26th, 2023. And the two old guys got together from the visit that we were having with Norbert and Leah. We decided to try and put a little family history recording, and hopefully we can do it justice, and it will be of some interest to someone in the family in the future. So as we develop this yarn, however long we can go, when the final film is edited, we'll interpose photos that would be relevant to the conversation. So anyhow, our family, the Rudeks and the Palkas, were from Poland. The Palkas, we don't really know a whole lot of history about, but they were from a place called Częstochowa, and Częstochowa is like the holiest shrine in Poland. And if you look it up, it'll have a picture of the Black Madonna. And our father had one of those hung up on one of his walls all the time. The Rudeks, we have a little more history. It was contributed by Uncle Norbert when we visited in 2003 to bury our dad's, Leon Rudek's, ashes. And I'm going to be referring to some of that. And we have information dating back to 1722 when there was a Michał Rudek, like Michael, but they pronounce it Michał. And they were pretty much from an area called Szalkowitz, Schalkowitz. And that area was either Poland or Germany at any given time, depending on who won the last war. We do know from the data that Uncle Norbert gave us that at least one of our relatives was in the Prussian army as a cuirassier or corsair, usually horse-mounted troops. Dad was from a family of three. His oldest brother was Irwin, I-R-W-I-N, Irwin, and Norbert. Dad was the smallest, and his own dad, his name was John, if you translate it from the Polish. In Polish it was Jan, J-A-N. He was married to Paulina, and curiously enough, her maiden name was also Rudek. I don't think there was any genetic mixing except for maybe many generations behind. Paulina died when Leon was only 3 years old, and Jan, our grandfather, remarried to a lady named Jadwiga, and we're going to investigate, and when this video is finalized, we'll try and confirm whether Jadwiga was actually a sister of Paulina. At this moment, we do not know that. Anything to add at this moment?
No, this is a great story.
It's a great story. Huh? So we fast forward a little bit to 1939, when war broke out in Europe. And our dad, Leon Rudek, was about 13 years old at the time. We visited the area of the city where Leon lived at the time, our dad. He was born in a little different location, a town, a place called Tychy, Tychy. Now, they lived in a place called Tarnowskie Góry. Very close to Tarnowskie Góry, where they were living, is a wooden radio tower, the exact spot where Germans invaded Poland. And you can investigate the history or story on it. The claim is that some Germans got dressed up as Polish troops and fired at the German side, and they took that as the go-ahead sign that they were being attacked, so they ran over Poland. Our dad, at least to me, didn't really talk a lot about the experience, but he said that when the Germans came in, big trucks came into the central square of the town, and they picked up anybody who was there. I presume he means any male that was potentially a working person, and they transported them to Germany, and our father ended up on a farm doing work on the farm, obviously not getting paid, and he claimed that he ate worse than the pigs did. I'm assuming that's correct. He escaped from there and went back home, and curiously there's a photograph of the family with his brother Norbert, his parents, Jan and Jadwiga, and Leon Rudek. And after that picture was taken, he was captured again and taken into indentured servitude, in a sense. And he escaped at least one more time, maybe two more times. I'm not quite clear on that. Eventually, he ended up escaping from that region, and he assimilated himself into a fairly large group of Polish people that escaped from the area and created a sort of a Polish army within the British Army. He was given a uniform, but for the most part I don't think he carried any firearms. He was a big kid. He towered over everybody, so he probably looked like he was old enough to be in the army. And we have photographs of him in North Africa. We have photographs of him in Italy, in Taranto, Italy, and there's some pictures of Monte Cassino, which was an area where a lot of Polish troops were sent and were slaughtered by the Germans that were inside this monastery. The pictures just show the monastery totally decimated by bombings from the Air Force. Anything to add?
Well, that's the correct version. But the kitchen table story that I was told, I was the lesser person there, was this. First of all, you have to understand that Germany was never really Germany. Germany was a bunch of fiefdoms, and Kaiser Wilhelm was the Kaiser of Prussia, and he had a fellow working for him named Otto von Bismarck. And he's the one that forced all of the German fiefdoms to unite and be called Germany, just in time for World War I. So our grandfather, we have pictures of him in a German uniform, working for the Kaiser in some non-shooting fashion, I'm sure, as a engineer, which is what he was.
Our cousin Michael Rudek, Norbert's son, wrote that Jan served as the, quote, mother of the company in Kaiser Wilhelm's army. In German, it's Kompanie Feldwebel, or Mutter der Kompanie, or Speis. From what I understood, it was the highest position in the company between sergeant and lieutenant. It was more of a position than a rank, and he reported directly to the commander. The mother of the company was responsible for administrative tasks and also for personnel matters. He was assigned as the only one in the company a bicycle and a notebook. Also, as the only one didn't have to fasten a button on his chest to have easy access to the notebook carried inside the pocket of his uniform. Jan served in sappers units.
So the war ended, and they got together at Versailles, and they decided to really punish Germany. And they redrew the map, and they did a bunch of other things which led into World War II, but they redrew the map. So this tribe of German-speaking people called Silesians had been living in the same area forever. There's history that at one time the Hohenzollerns ruled it, other times the Habsburgs ruled it, but they were Silesians. They didn't care who ruled them. They were Silesians. They lived in their land. But World War I, the way that it ended, really pissed off these Silesians because almost 4.5 million of them packed up and moved back into German territory because this land now became Polish. So it would be like if everyone from Bel Air and Beverly Hills packed up and moved out, and all the people of East LA moved into Beverly Hills. They wanted to go there because the farms were better kept. Everything was just set up. Well, it was kind of like the land of milk and honey. So the neighborhoods filled up with Poles. Very few Germans stayed. We stayed, Polish. So all these neighborhoods that once were of German-speaking people. And what is the land? Is it the people or is it the land? What makes them German? So they left, but our folks did not leave. They were too established. They stayed there. So one thing led to another. The Poles came in, and I guess Granddad got along with them because he got a lot of work from them. This area produced coal for the Krupp steel mills. So they had to transport this coal over to where the mills were. So grandfather designed railroad stations and bridges and the infrastructure to transport this coal. And at the time, some of this was kind of unique because these were self-building trains using a pitch, a gradient. So all this went along, and just before, remember, this is what a kid was being told by his parents at the kitchen table. So when the Germans invaded, or before the Germans invaded, the Poles knew this was going to happen. So they ordered grandfather to destroy what he built, the transportation infrastructure, the bridges and whatever else. So that happened. The Wehrmacht rolled through in a few minutes, followed by the, the Wehrmacht and their police people. I don't know if they were called Gestapo. Yeah, they're Gestapo. So they started talking to the Polish villagers, and they said, hey, who destroyed all this? And the Poles fingered grandfather. Next thing you know, grandfather was in Auschwitz. And sooner or later, the Germans went on their way to Russia, and the Corps of Engineers, the German Corps of Engineers, showed up. And they looked around, they asked a few questions, and they realized that the guy who built all this is sitting in Auschwitz, which wasn't too far away. So they went and got him, and grandfather helped the Germans rebuild all of the infrastructure to transport coal to Krupp. And the story was that he would get a ride in a limousine from his home to where the work was being done. And he got to be pretty good buddies with them, and they gave him some advice. I mean, Germans are very big about keeping records and classifying. They're bureaucrats. So the Germans that grandfather was buddies with said, what you want to do is sign up for the lowest classification of German you possibly can. That'll keep your sons from getting drafted. And it worked for a while. And, we were walking around with Class 4 German Volksdeutsche papers. And everything was okay. But remember, the Germans lost 4 million dead in the Russian front. Then suddenly everybody became Class 1. The two uncles, the older uncles, were drafted into the Wehrmacht. Both were shot. They ended up in different prisoner of war camps. Our father, who was 13 and already way over 6 feet tall, he was walking around town with Class 4 class papers. And a truck pulled up. He ended up in the back, and he went to a work farm because armies need to be fed. And that fellow treated him very poorly, and Father used to tell stories about how he would screw around with this farmer. And he finally did one thing that was so bad that he had to leave. And he left and he went home. The Gestapo picked him up again and put him in a work camp. This time it was full of French officers. And when the French officers left, they took him with them. So he spent the rest of the shooting war in France with the resistance. I don't know what he did. Pretty sure he never shot any Germans because it could have been his brothers.
The following is a written description of the facts that Norbert just told from the standpoint of our cousin Michał Rudek, who lives in Poland, of course. From 1922, most of the Tarnowski Góry district, where Jan lived and worked before the outbreak of World War II, which from their perspective was September of 1939, that area belonged to Poland again, and the Polish army was stationed there. Jan was indeed pointed out by his co-workers as the person responsible for mining the bridges, more specifically as the person responsible for preparing the railroad bridges, turnouts, railroad switching stations, etc., for mining and bombing, such as drilling holes, preparing chambers for explosive charges, etc. In short, for preparing diversionary activities on the railroad infrastructure. In fact, the Army did not manage to destroy anything on the section for which Jan was responsible. But the evidence remained. As a person suspected of diversionary activities, he had to report daily to the Gestapo and was indeed threatened with serious consequences, including the death penalty. But Jan, fortunately, was not in prison in Auschwitz. His German successor railroad station master searched through all the documentation and found a Polish military order addressed to railway workers ordering cooperation with the military to mine railroad infrastructure. In those days, railroads were very much linked to the military. On this basis, Grandfather Jan, as the person in charge of the railroad infrastructure section, had to cooperate with a Polish sapper officer. Fortunately, proceeding in accordance with the German interpreter in his favor, and in parentheses, Befehl ist Befehl, and exempted him from the obligation to report to the Gestapo every day, and finally did not accuse him of diversion. By the end of the war, however, he was not allowed to return to work on the railroad and was employed, I think, in a small construction company. The whole time of World War II, Jan, our grandfather, lived and worked in Tarnowskie Góry. As far as the brothers' involvement in the war and how each was involved and was taken into the armed conflict, this is what Michał had to say. With the onset of the war, the brothers' paths diverged. Erwin was drawn into the army directly. Norbert initially to schools and then also to the army. And Leon was sent to a forced labor camp in Germany, a Landjahr as it's called, or year in the land. They did not see Leon until 1968. I believe that the Landjahr served by Leon was part of the Hitler Youth, in which he worked on a farm and from which he escaped and was briefly back home, but then escaped again, was taken in, escaped again, and then met the fate that Norbert described earlier with the French underground. He says that the war was essentially a time that neither Erwin nor Norbert wanted to mention. It must have been a very hard, traumatic time for them. Suffice it to say that when Erwin returned home from Russia as a POW, he was so battered that his father didn't recognize him and wouldn't let him into the house. Of course, at that time, it was a communist period in Poland, and both Norbert and Erwin rather tried to hide their past. He says, once I grew up and we could talk, they grew older with some memories preserved and focused around some of the same facts. Erwin talked mostly about how he saved an infant under fire and a bit about the horrors of a Russian POW camp. Norbert mostly talked about his military training, hospital stay, American POW time, and the way back to Poland. I think they repressed some of their memories for this period, and some of them did not want to return.
After the war, the English were smart enough to know that you're not going to stop these Russians. The next thing you know, we're going to be having Borscht here. So he picked up all these displaced Europeans, lots of them, my father included, and set them up as cannon fodder. They kept those people mobilized for 3 years. And my father had a great time. He spent time in England, time in Italy, which he really liked, time in North Africa. I'm not sure if he liked that. But this was being managed by the English. And they had different countries there, and he was attached to a Polish part. And when that mobilization ended, you had to leave. And of course you tried to go to America, but that you couldn't go there. You tried to get into Canada, couldn't go there. So the only place that was open arms welcoming more white Europeans was Argentina. And that's what happened.
So, your understanding is that once he left Poland, he did not go to England. He was with, or was he with the French resistance? Well, French resistance was in France.
Yes. During the shooting war, he was still in France.
Okay.
That was my understanding. It was only when the British mobilized him that they brought him back to England, for whatever organization, and then sent them back out.
So, just a little addition to that, and I don't know if it makes any real sense, but I asked Uncle Norbert when we visited in 2003, I asked him how the people of that area felt when the Germans came through. And basically he kind of shrugged his shoulders and he said, we felt that we were Germans, so we didn't think it was such a big deal. That was at the very beginning of the war. Yeah, an impression is that our old man spoke actually multiple languages. I don't know which one he spoke without an accent. Probably Polish, I'm not sure. But all the other ones he spoke well. And actually for a guy who only had a 6th grade education, he was very well read.
Yeah, He could speak some English because he was with the British Army there from 45 to 48. So somewhere in there, he learned a little bit of English. And
Yeah, so he got to Argentina, I think, in 1948.
48, right. So my mom taught him Spanish, what he says was his favorite language, not his native German or Polish, but he preferred the Spanish. Although Polish was common between our two parents, and when they wanted to say something that absolutely none of us would ever understand, they spoke among themselves freely in Polish, and for the purpose of us not understanding. My mom spoke also Portuguese, and my father German, Polish, English, and along the way he picked up a little bit of Russian and a little bit of Italian.
And probably French, I would imagine. So.
Probably, he never said that, but he never talked about his time in France, to me.
Yeah, well, that's, I think, grandfather Jan Rudik studied in Berlin, we believe, in German, of course, and I think German was almost his primary language.
I don't think he started speaking Polish until the Poles started getting... Well, all Europeans can speak multiple languages at all times. But these people were primarily Germans. They had to speak Polish, of course. I mean, if suddenly your town overnight becomes Polish, you better learn Polish.
Right. As far as family relationships, Dad, Leon Rudik, whenever he spoke of his stepmother, Jan's second wife, it was not in a very nice way. She was a little tight-fisted. And the one thing I remember him telling us was that he was really upset that his family, being one of the richer families in that city, other kids wanted to go to the movies, and her mother would not. His mother would not give him the 5 cents to pay for the movie tickets. So he held that resentment until his dying day. Didn't make any other complaints, but there was always a little bit of disdain or friction.
This is what Michał writes about Jadwiga. Jan was Jadwiga's second husband. The first husband was someone named Robert Tomczyk. Robert Tomczyk had a major alcohol problem, which was the cause of his early death. Robert Tomczyk's alcoholism was the cause of much of Jadwiga's suffering, even physical suffering, as well as poverty in their home. Jadwiga gave birth to a total of 6 children, 5 with Robert and 1 with Jan. All of them died at infancy. My father, Norbert, claimed that Jadwiga was very thrifty, economical, and took good care of her stepchildren, but she didn't spoil them. He never said a bad word about her. Norbert lived in one house with Jan and Jadwiga until he was 42 years old. And by the way, Leon had no Polish accent. He spoke perfectly.
There was some trauma going on there, and I'll give you an example. The old man never said he was traumatized by this, but I can't imagine how you could not be traumatized by this. He was born left-handed like I am, but that was bad juju there with the Catholics, so he had to be taught to be right-handed. I mean, as an adult, he could start handwriting with his right hand and finish with his left hand. You wouldn't see where one left off and the other picked up. But that is incredibly difficult for a child to do that, to be taught to switch hands. So there was some trauma, and I'm sure the stepmother had lots to do with that. So they were not on the right foot.
But when he went back to visit in 1968, I think they got along okay. So Leon Rudik hadn't been back to see his family. Well, he probably stopped seeing them in, 40, 42? And then he went to Argentina. I mean, he wrote frequently and got photos and got updated. But in 1968, he became a citizen, naturalized citizen, and he made a trip to Poland.
Well, first he stopped in Germany and bought a VW Beetle.
Yes, and at that time, Czechoslovakia was trying to get free from the claws of the Russian communists.
And the old man took a shortcut through Czechoslovakia,
He-
just as the Russians were invading.
Yeah, the Russians brought the tanks, closed the border, and Leon Rudek got shut out for a brief time. And as a result, he got an ulcer and he was hospitalized for a few days in Germany. And he finally got out and drove around in a different direction and got in to see his father after many, many, many years, and his brothers, of course. Subsequently, he went again by himself as well as the two together to visit family.
So we see Jan Rudek and Leon harvesting pears. Jan always was interested in gardening, as we will see. And there is also the ever-present cat, as we see Jan peeling pears with him. He also had chickens, and he fed them. And we'll see him doing some weed abatement and harvesting in a few minutes. This was obviously a time of festivity, both for Leon and his immediate family, as we see some pretty impressive dinners, and we see Leon drinking milk from his ulcer treatment. Remember, we mentioned that he developed an ulcer when the Russians closed the Czech border and foiled his attempt to get into Poland. He had to be hospitalized and then subsequently took a different route to get to see his family. In this scene of the toast, we actually see Leon, Jan, Irving, and Norbert, and a very young Michał in the blue sweater in the back. And like all good things, even this visit had to come to an end. Jan would live for another 20 years and actually visit the United States.
But he brought that 68 bug, and I used it to go to high school and college. And when we went to, after I got married, and Gay and I went to medical school, which initially was in Chile for 4 years, and subsequently in Loyola in Chicago for a couple of years. Then the VW stayed in the family, and Norbert used it when he was in town because he went to the Coast Guard Academy in 1976?
75.
75, okay. And then,
John, I think, drove the Beetle. I drove that the hippie van from across the street.
Okay, yeah, because Dad had multiple Volkswagen trucks and vans. And John actually crashed the bug. Just as a sidelight, their area, Silesia, which in Polish they pronounce Śląsk. Anyone who comes from the Śląsk area is considered a Ślązaki. And Ślązaki were held in high esteem by other Polish people, which sort of ties us into the move from Europe, England, to South America, to Argentina. So we'll go back a little bit and talk about the Palkas a little. Grandfather Nicholas Palka married Vladislava Motwok.
Gladys.
Okay, Gladys would be a direct translation, but everyone who really liked her, and that was about everybody that spoke Polish, would call her Vladzia or Władzia. Anyhow, Grandpa's idea was that he wanted to be a farmer. I don't know if it was a gentleman farmer, but he wanted to be a successful farmer. And apparently things were tough in Poland, where I think they may have farmed. I don't have a lot of information, but he and another couple, Polish couple, decided to travel together to South America, and they first went to Brazil.
This is on his return.
That was on the return?
Yes.
Okay.
Because they were first established in Buenos Aires. Mom was born there, and they saved up their money to go back on this dream of being rich farmers, and failed and had to come back.
Mm-hmm.
They couldn't get back in Argentina, but Brazil wanted white Europeans to fight off the pythons in the jungle and farm it.
So, just to recap, they came to Argentina, tried farming or whatever other employment, saved
He
up.
worked in the city, right?
I believe you're correct. But anyway, they saved up enough money to go back and buy land, presumably, and try and farm in Poland. And that was a complete fiasco. And our mom related a story that they had befriended or had some sort of interaction with a Jewish man. I don't know if he was a banker or not. But when this Jewish man found out that they wanted to go back to Poland and farm, he told him, Nicholas, the cows on your farm are going to eat you alive. And, you know, he was prescient. He kind of knew what he was talking about. But so Marta was born during the first incursion into Argentina, and that was 1929. They went back to Poland, and I believe Daniel was born in Poland. Things were so rough that they decided to go back, and they went through Brazil. And the story that Mom told me is that they went to the area called Mato Grosso, which I guess means big forest or something like that. And supposedly somebody got spooked by a big snake that lived there, and they said, this is not for us, so let's go back to Argentina. And that's where they established a home in a city called Avellaneda, which is very close to the central part of Buenos Aires. And Grandpa got a job with a wool processing plant that was very close to where their home ended up being, like a block away. What they would do was bring in wool from the central part of Argentina. They would wash it, pack it into big bales, and then take it to the harbor, which is not too far away, with trucks that they owned. So the story goes that someone knew that a guy named Leon Rudek, who was from Silesia, Śląsk, was coming to Buenos Aires. And of course they had that good reputation, so they went and met him at the harbor and took him in, put him up for a few, I don't know, days, weeks, months. And that, of course, is where Mom and Dad met. At that time, at that particular time, Mom had the mumps, so she was very embarrassed, but Also, there was with the two people that they had known and had come to South America with, I don't know if it was the first trip or the second trip, probably the first trip. Their name was the Englerts. They moved to a city called Mar del Plata, which to Buenos Aires is kind of the sea resort area. But they always kept in contact, and as a matter of fact, they had a son, and there was talk that Marta would end up marrying this son, but she didn't care for him. And of course, then comes 6'3" Leon Rudek.
Blonde, gray-eyed.
Yeah, and all full of muscles. And, the rest is history. They were married. But Leon also wanted to do farming. I don't quite know where he got that idea. Mom told me a story that he got a job in a factory in Buenos Aires. And he worked for I don't know exactly how long, but he became very ill, apparently with pneumonia, and was laid up for quite a while. And he attributed the pneumonia and the illness to living in a city, in a big city. So he was determined to go and farm. And somehow they got a piece of land in a place called El Tigre, which is along the El Tigre River, fairly close to it. And it must have been pretty rough, because obviously they didn't have a lot of money to pay for equipment to do the farming, so mostly it was Leon's hard labor. Things apparently, and that's about the time I was born, things got pretty rough. They kind of separated for a while. Mom went to live with her parents, then there was a reuniting, and they changed the farm location. At that time, Juan Perón, the dictator, took power, and among other actions that his government did was to appropriate land from some very rich families, and the land at that time was just lying fallow, not being worked. And there was a place that ended up being called Parque Pereira Iraola that was subdivided into farm plots. And there were our parents, there were some other Polish people that they maintained as friends, there were some Russians, there was a lot of Portuguese. They farmed, and the idea was to take their produce and sell it at a central market, and or sell it at street markets that would appear throughout once a week throughout parts of Buenos Aires. Now our mom had a brother, Daniel Palca, and he was blind in one eye, for what it's worth. He was sent to a technical school where he learned to operate a lathe. He was pretty good at it, from what I understand. But I don't know if he couldn't get work. He ended up working with our father. I don't know if he actually worked much on the farm doing the actual harvesting or planting or anything like that. But he did go to these street fairs, and they would set up I don't know where they got these things, but they had a table with sawhorses, metal sawhorses, and I think a cover, and they would put carrots and whatever else they had.
Farmer's market.
For sale, yeah, farmer's market, exactly. And that didn't go very well at all. So I was born, and I remember living on that farm. I remember that it had corrugated metal roof, and the roof leaked. And I remember that storms in Argentina had a lot of lightning, and you could look at by the entry driveway, which was all dirt, and there would be puddles of rain, and ducks and geese were kind of running around. You could really see them when the lightning struck. The farming didn't go well, so I'll tell one more anecdote on the farming. There was one time when the provincial government decided that they were going to cut through a wooded area to create a road, and they invited all of the people that lived, the farmers, if they wanted the wood, the timber, to come and collect it. And I remember we went with some of the other Polish people, and the Portuguese had come by and they'd cleaned everything up. There was nothing left. So they came back empty-handed. But then they sold the farm. I remember when it was a cash kind of effect. And I don't know if the government actually gave them a deed that they literally owned the land. I think it was more of a lease, and this was some kind of a sale of the lease to the next farmer. So we started living in Buenos Aires in Grandma and Grandpa's house. And the house itself it was a small entry with a little bit of garden on either side. Not very, I don't think that they really tended much. Then there was a building with 2 rooms, one of which was a kitchen, and another one was a bedroom. And there were several bedrooms on one side to the end where there was a single bathroom. And it was kind of a one-holer bathroom. It didn't really have a toilet. And there was a little water tank on top, and they actually had a shower with I remember it was an electric water heater. And they actually had some tenants. They had one fellow who was very good friends with our grandfather, and this guy's name was Jose Lukianishin. He was Ukrainian. Very, very, very good friends. As a matter of fact, it was one of the Italian neighbors that we had next door, and they had kids who were about our age, and the parents bought the boy a tricycle, and I approached him to see if he would let me ride it, and no way, they said, no, you can't do that. And Jose got upset, saying, oh, those Italians can't do that to our boy. So they said, let's go get him a tricycle, and they did. The idea of owning land and having a farm persisted because they bought 4 parcels of land altogether, and Daniel had one, we had one, our grandparents owned part of it, and I think that Jose owned another part. And they actually built kind of a rudimentary house, and we had what we referred to as a peon there. It was a Russian guy, and he kind of lived and kept the thieves away to some degree. The neighborhood in Avellaneda in Buenos Aires was pretty industrial. The road, which was paved with stones, kind of ended right by where the house was, and it would continue as a dirt road towards one of the inlets of the river, which was totally polluted. Then on the same side of the block that our house was on, if you walked about a block and a half, there was a petroleum distillery there. They made, I don't know, kerosene and things like that. On the other block was the wool washing area, and that covered both sides of the block. And there were just a lot of really old buildings. This was a very, very old part of Buenos Aires, as I've studied it a little bit. It was good transportation. There were buses everywhere, and we took the train. Frequently we'd take the train to go to the farm, the last farm that they owned, until we bought, and I think it was mostly with the help of our moms dad, Nicholas, we bought one of the used trucks from the wool washing factory that we then used to go back and forth to the farm. And we go there occasionally. I don't think we went there every weekend or something like that.
Nicholas Palka died in 1957, just a couple of months before Norbert was born. He had been born himself in 1902 in Częstochowa. His death was very sudden, and it happened while at work. And my suspicion is that this was due to a ruptured abdominal aortic aneurysm.
Then you came along, and do you have any memories of that?
Of Argentina?
Yes, where we lived.
I remember one bus ride we took to Cordoba. I remember that. But just to throw a little color on that question, you know, why farming? Well, afterwards, I picked up some data points, and I maybe can throw some light on that. The old man, who again was a giant of a man, and he conducted himself with honor, so people liked him and respected him. And he had a great job in California. I mean, we had a nice house, we ate very well, everything was fine. So even though this giant of a man who was very kind to everything, inside he was a very insecure person. I guess because since he was a kid, first of all, he didn't get along with the woman who raised him, and then the Nazis chased him all over Europe, and in his mind was a very black-white kind of thing, and his father was a PhD in civil engineering, and his two brothers were engineers as well. So to Germans, education is everything, which is false, but this is how Germans still think. So he felt even more insecure because he didn't have an education. So he pushed every day to make sure that one of his kids at least would be successful, and that's this guy here. So if you're a young guy and you're barely 20 years old, and you have seen the horrors of World War II, and all the uncertainty of it. His brothers were in POW camps. I mean, just that's a lot on a guy's head. So you go there to Argentina. Well, how are you going to find security? Well, some people might go to work and save their money and invest their thing, but to my dad, the only thing that was certain was food you could take out of the ground. So I can kind of see why this kid, who didn't come from a farming family, wanted to farm because he could grow food out of the ground. So it's a form of security. I think that was something, because he probably figured, well, if these other guys are starving, at least I'll have my subsistence farm.
Yeah, I think so. And I mean, he always told me that when they took him as a 13-year-old to wherever they did, that they put him to work on a farm. So he must have learned some farming techniques there.
Oh, that too, yeah.
You know, that's only speculation. Getting back to the neighborhood in Buenos Aires, I told you about a couple of industries. There was one industry that was sort of on the same block, but far back. If you took that dirt road that went towards the river, I mean, usually when there were strikes or something like that and the trash wasn't picked up, people would bring trash and dump it over there. So there were piles, kind of empty lot, but a bunch of piles of disposed of material. And then there were some open fields that frequently were used as impromptu soccer fields. But their purpose of that field was that there was a tannery there. And very often, if you walk down that dirt road towards the river, you could see the tanned hides. They were all black and shiny, and they formed a square frame and the hides had little holes put on, like on the arms and legs of the animal's hide, and they use ropes to tie them to the little frame to keep it stretched. And they would bring them out and dry them in the sun. And then whenever they were appropriately dried. And directly across the street from us, on the same block that the wool washing place was a supplier of seltzer bottles. So Argentines drink a lot of wine, and I don't know if it's because the wine is a little bit on the strong side or they got used to it, but it's very common, it was, at least in those days, that people would have a seltzer bottle with a little pushing lever on it, on the nozzle on one side and the lever on the other. But anyway, this place would kind of recycle those. They would reuse them when people would use them up. These were glass bottles. They had a glass straw that went down to pick up the carbonated water from the bottom. And they had these great big tanks, and I'm not sure about the physics, but they would push water and I guess CO2, unless it was just plain air, and form the bubbles in the bottled water. They'd fill the bottles, put them in boxes, and deliver them to stores, and they would deliver them like milk used to be delivered here. And occasionally one of those bottles would explode, and you could hear it across the street. So minor detail, but our family liked to eat black bread. I didn't, but my grandfather and my grandmother. And there was a Jewish bakery in downtown Buenos Aires. I had gone to it several times, and I remember that they sent me as a kid, and I must have been younger than 11, to take buses, and I don't know if it was more than one bus, to go to this downtown bakery and bring back the big loaf of black bread, you know, so it was a Jewish bakery.
There were more Jews in Buenos Aires than in Tel Aviv today.
Yeah.
There's a gigantic Jewish population, so Argentina not anti-Semitic before we moved.
Yeah, interesting you mentioned about Buenos Aires. Let's jump back there a little bit. I went to the state-sponsored school, and Mom thought that they weren't doing well with me. So then I went to a Catholic school at Sagrado Corazon, which means Sacred Heart.
Yeah, there's pictures of you. All the kids are wearing lab coats.
Well, in Argentina, that is the uniform. I don't know if that still holds true today, but at that time, every school kid wore a white lab coat. That was the uniform in Buenos Aires. Now, our lives were, I mean, we thought we were doing fine. And as a matter of fact, I remember going on at least one vacation to visit those friends that had immigrated at the same time that lived in Mar del Plata. So I went with my mom. I don't believe my grandmother went, and spent, I don't know, a week, maybe two, living in these people's homes and then going to the beach occasionally. And then the wool washing factory, the employees had formed a union. And this union purchased a small hotel in one of the mountain resorts in Argentina, in the inland part, a place called Córdoba. So the bus ride that he remembered was going to that place in Córdoba.
That was the connection. Okay, I didn't understand that. Okay.
Yeah, and we actually, the year before that, and that must have been 1961, or 62, right before we came here. We had gone to another ski resort called Mar de Ajó with Mom. Dad would always stay behind and work, because obviously that was not tenable to do that kind of thing. So, you know, things were pretty tough for Dad's work, and life was pretty tough in Argentina. So we had the goal or desire to move to the United States. And, we followed the normal process and filed papers to see if we could come here. And we did one set of papers and we were rejected. And basically what the US government asks or demands is that if you're going to come here, you need to have someone that will be sort of your backstop. Sponsor. That if you get into trouble and you can't work, you don't become a burden on the state. Of course, that in this day and age, that
Just the opposite.
is quite the opposite. But our grandmother worked as a housekeeper in the home of a relatively wealthy Jewish lady. And that lady had relatives here in the United States, namely Dion Neutra, who was married to a famous architect in Southern California. She had a sister in Westwood. Her name was Regula.
This is a unique photograph of about the entire Neutra family, with Richard Neutra on the left, someone named Wilke, that may be a daughter that we don't know about, then Dion, his son, who went on to become an architect. Then we see an older lady and an older man, partially hidden by the cactus, and they're named Mutterli and Vaterli. Those are the parents, mother and father, of Regula and Dion, which are to their right. And finally, there is Raymond, the son who went on to become a physician and worked at Harvard in the field of public health. He actually wrote a letter of recommendation for medical school for Robert during his first attempts at getting into medical school.
We called her Mrs. T or Mrs. Thorsten. And the third sister lived in Buenos Aires, and that's the lady that Grandma worked for. And Grandma, I guess, approached her and asked if there was any way they could help. And she contacted Mrs. Neutra here, and somehow they agreed to do that. So they were our sponsors. I remember that we wondered why we had sort of failed our first time, and we felt lucky that we got a sponsor to come here. So the idea would be to bring kind of all of our relevant earthly possessions. And I remember that they built a big trunk that we had most of our clothes in and all that. And we came here on a Japanese freighter. It was
Santos Maru.
Santos Maru. It's no longer in existence. And it was part freight, part passenger. They had 3 classes. We were in second class, which was very nice. I remember going to third class, and that's where all the Japanese traveled. And they had like bunk beds. They were all together in one big room, and they had one big bathtub with hot water. It was communal bath. It was quite nice. Oh, one of the other reasons we presumably wanted to immigrate was that Norbert had had many bouts of bronchitis and cough, and Buenos Aires had kind of a
Hot, humid, just like New Orleans environment.
kind of flat, and when it rains, water aggregates. And anyway, he was sick quite a bit of the time, and the doctor that we had, which sometimes we used to pay with some chickens because we didn't have any money. I actually saw that with my own eyes, that we did that. But anyway, he said, hey, you might want to consider moving to somewhere that has a little more of a dry climate, like California. And so the things started.
I think I just now put it in my head, the way you framed it. the reason why they rejected the Norte sponsorship is that it was so over the top.
Yeah.
How did these little people from Buenos Aires get hooked up with
Yeah.
a mid-century modern architect in Los Angeles?
Yeah, actually the first time we didn't have Nitro, the second time we had Nitro.
Oh, okay.
That's what happened. So a little back story on this is that a couple of days before we were supposed to board the ship, I went to the house of some, I guess they were Polish or Ukrainian friends of the family, and it was only like a block away. And they had a little dog, and this dog came over and bit my butt, actually broke the skin. So everybody was very concerned that I was going to have rabies. And so the question was what to do. Well, I think they quarantined the dog, and he was finally okay. We got the word. But in the meantime, they gave us the doses of the rabies treatment, which is pretty nasty because they actually have to inject it into your abdomen. They gave it to Grandma, and she threw it into the water. So as we traveled, we didn't have that medicine, so if I had rabies, I would have bitten everybody. I guess she was confident enough that I wasn't going to get sick. I was about 10, and I had my birthday on board ship, and I turned 11. So you were about 5 then?
4.
4?
But notice key things here. He mentioned wool, he mentioned hides. Argentina is a resource nation like Australia or Canada. They were very big into growing beef and grains and shipping it off to Europe. The Thorstons, who got us out of Buenos Aires, was a commodity broker, which would make sense to be there in the port if you're lining up shipments of soybeans for England. So that kind of, in my mind, I had to go back there and see, but it kind of explains the difference between America and Argentina. They're a farming community with a fancy port called Buenos Aires. Not a lot. They weren't building cars there or any kind of big industry. They were neutral during the war, so they weren't called on to build anything, just supply food.
And by the way, in spite of all the rumors and innuendos, at least I don't remember meeting any post-World War II Nazis in Argentina, although I'm sure there were some there.
We couldn't afford to go to their neighborhoods because they lived up in something very similar to the Alps in a town called Bariloche. So they went there and established Little Germany there.
Yeah, most of the friends that we had, and I think this is one of the interesting things, is that we had a multilingual household and neighborhood because there was people that spoke Polish, Russian/Ukrainian. We heard Portuguese. There were Italians that were living across the street. There was a guy named Rodolfo that was a mechanic, and there was the Spanish family, Abraldes, 2 doors down. Actually, next door there was a kind of a hermit kind of a guy. He was a knife and industrial blade sharpener. The guy in Mar del Plata also did that kind of work.
Which makes sense because Argentina differs from the rest of Latin America in that they didn't really have an indigenous population, but for a pocketful of them that lived in the interior part that did all the cattle work. So they desperately wanted to import more white Europeans, especially Italians, but they would accept English and German than anybody else. But if you were Italian, you were okay.
So, if I had to give our dad's work or profession the shortest term, I would say he was a metal worker welder. Would you agree with that, or would you add something to it?
Well, he certainly had that, but at the times, they had printing presses, and these things would frequently break. So the old man's understanding of physics and machinery was pretty good. I mean, they had to go in there and repair this stuff themselves. I mean, during his career, he saw all that disappear as the Times tried to install different technologies in there to, they had fiberglass plates instead of lead ones, and then at the very end, they just got this big, giant copying machine, and that's what they were putting the papers on. It was pretty weird. But he helped oversee that. I mean, things break. Somebody's got to fix it fast.
My understanding of the kind of jobs he held, besides the farming part, I think the first one he had was with a relatively big company. I think it was called Bunge, B-U-N-G-E, Born, B-O-R-N-E. And they, among other things, I think manufactured either cement or cement-related production.
It might be a coincidence, but you said Bunge. In the United States, Bunge, at Cargill, they are big food processors. They run grain elevators, and so all farmers know, or Bunge, if it still exists. So another commodity company.
Yeah, good insight. Then he worked in construction, and actually what he was doing in particular was welding radiant heating pipes in the floors, ceilings of each floor of this apartment to heat during the winter time. He never worked in the wool factory, which is kind of interesting. But his last job that he held, if I had to describe how he would describe the people that he worked for, he said it would be crooks. Okay? So the scam that these people had was related to oil. And they were oil transporters. So they had these big tanker trucks, or maybe they were small compared to what we have nowadays. And what our dad did was to weld these silos. The tanker trucks have openings on the top where they get filled. And of course they've got a pipe where they empty on the back or the sides. But what he did was create these silos that were welded to the top of the tank where the openings were to fill it. And it had a kind of a false bottom. And as Dad described it, what they would do is they would get used crankcase oil and fill the bulk of the tank. And then these silos that he created, they would fill with pure, fresh linseed oil, which was presumably what they were transporting.
Linseed being consumable, the other part being poisonous.
Right. So they would get to deliver their stuff, they'd empty all the garbage stuff, and somehow they would go up to the top and tap the false bottom, and then all this good linseed oil would come out at the end. So he said, when they got through delivering, you would get the smell of the linseed oil, so they thought, oh, this is a great delivery. But I don't know if they ever went to jail or not, but the old man didn't.
By the way, because I never heard any of that.
So I think we had to fill in a little bit of other family history. Our mom's brother, Daniel Palca, who was the kind of mechanically trained
Lathe operator,
etc. While we were still in Argentina, I had married a lady from Brazil. He used to go to Brazil. You know, it's a neighboring country. It was easy to travel there. Actually, I don't know if he spent a year or two or whatever. Her first name was Estacia. I don't know how to translate that, but there's some photos of her, and they ended up having a child, Carlos. And they ended up separating. And then Daniel subsequently married another lady. I think Estacia got married to another Argentine somewhere else, and I don't quite remember. I think she raised Carlos. Carlos has his own family now. My wife, Gay, and I saw him when we were in medical school in Chile for 4 years. We went and visited Argentina, and we saw him. At that time, he was living with Daniel. He was probably around 17 or 18 years old. And now he himself is married, and I think he owns one of those semi-trucks and does transportation within Argentina. That's a little more than hearsay, but that's about all the information I have. We have not communicated with him. As far as I know, he still lives in Argentina. All right, let's jump back to the trip from Buenos Aires to Los Angeles, which was on that relatively small combined carrier, cargo and passenger Japanese ship. It was actually an interesting voyage because we stopped in at least 2 places in Brazil, in a place called Santos, where they spent many hours loading iron ore in kind of a granular form.
The Santos Maru, I believe, was a Liberty ship. So it was a break bulk freighter, because he was talking about the iron ore that they were pumping in there. So on the forward part of the ship, they would have these cargo holds, which had great big openings. And these, sometimes they have steel doors, but these had canvas covers over them. And canvas being exposed to the sun is liable to tear at any second. And between that canvas cover and the bottom, it could be 40, 50, 60 feet. But I didn't think about that. I was only 4. So I went on top of these canvas covers, and I thought, what a great trampoline. So I was bouncing up on these trampolines as high as I could, and survived. I remember that, and I remember that when lunchtime came, some Japanese guy would walk around with a chime and go ding, ding, ding. And
That's right.
That was that was the meal. I remember that.
Time to eat. That's exactly right.
And I remember after we departed the Santos Maru. And by the way, when we entered the Santos Maru, they used to do a tradition with ocean liners, and that is that they would throw streamers, and someone on the dock would catch one end of this paper ribbon, and someone on the ship would catch it, and then as the ship pulled away, these streamers would break. And I remember the Santos Maru did that. So
That's right.
I remember being there in wherever we docked, Long Beach, San Pedro. I remember thinking to myself, for a split second, what are we doing in a foreign land? I don't, and I asked the old man, do you speak English? So that was my impression of the voyage.
I remember that they were shooting it for hours and hours, making a lot of noise right next to where our stateroom was. But our mom had family in Brazil, and one day we got into a bus and went up some mountains and visited them. And periodically, I think she had some contact with them, but we never really touched base. I spent the first 7 days of the voyage barfing. Everybody else was doing fine, eating my portions of food, running around, and then they gave me a shot, and I managed to get my sea legs, and I did okay the rest of the voyage. We did go through the Panama Canal, which to me is one of the more memorable things. I don't know if you have any memory of that.
A little bit, a little bit, yeah.
And we disembarked in San Pedro, where we were met by the sister of Mrs. Neutra. Her name was Regula. For some reason they called her Mighty, like M-A-I-T-E. I don't know where that came from. And she was very, very nice to us. As a matter of fact, she took us to eat our first hamburger somewhere on probably either Sunset Boulevard or Hollywood Boulevard. And I remember that they didn't let me drink anything like Coca-Cola. She ordered milk for me, and I had never drunk milk as sort of free milk, part of a drink with a meal. And I started adding sugar to it to make it taste better. But so we went and lived for, I think it was 2 months, on a Kilton Avenue in Westwood. She was a real estate agent for a company that doesn't exist anymore. It's called Henry. And they had just had a flood inside the house, so some guy was taking off the linoleum tiles at that time and replacing them. And Dad was doing some kind of work associated with it.
The Kilton Avenue house was a triplex. We lived with Mr. Niederman and Regula in the back. The central part and upper part was occupied by a couple of married professors at UCLA that were anthropologists, and the front was occupied by an attorney. We mentioned that when we arrived, the rear part of the house, of the triplex, had been flooded, and it was probably flooded because of this fancy design for a hidden toilet that Mr. Neutra had made.
Very close to UCLA, and I remember that Dad was asked to go to Silver Lake, Los Angeles, which was probably about, I don't know, 20, 25 miles from Westwood. They gave him the key to a car. He didn't have a license. He had no GPS, but somehow he made it and made it back. And I don't know, he just knew how to do it.
Silver Lake and Los Feliz, very popular with movie stars today.
Mm-hmm.
They love that area.
So after those first 2 months, we moved to the Silver Lake area and actually stayed for a couple of weeks in some tiny rooms that existed in the in Mr. Neutra's designer house there that he had that overlooked the lake, and actually it was open to 2 sides of the street. What do they call that, the place for the architects? It wasn't an
Studio?
It wasn't the experiment house. It was something like that.
Design house?
Yeah, I think that was it. And that's where we met Domingo and Marta Paglia, who were Argentines. And Domingo was an architect, and he came, like many other foreigners, that worked in the office part of that house.
When he was a student, he wrote a letter to Neutra saying, look, I'm working on a class project, may I ask you some questions? And Neutra wrote him back, why don't you come here and work for me?
Yeah, so there were people from Colombia, from other parts of Europe, and basically they were trying to gain some experience, but also be able to use the reference that they had trained with Neutra. But we became lifelong friends with the parents, Domingo and Marta Paglia, and with the 3 boys, and then subsequently the two girls that they adopted. From the main house that they had, they moved us to another office that they had about 2 blocks away on Glendale Boulevard, 2379 Glendale Boulevard. Basically, this was one long building where they had a lot of drafting tables. In those days, they didn't use CAD and CAM. So people actually took rulers and pencils and drew lines, and but really at that time it wasn't being used very much. And there were 2 apartments way in the back. We occupied the bottom one. It was converted into an apartment. They put a plywood divider, and the upstairs apartment was actually more of an apartment, and that was rented by some people that we befriended, the Rays, Alvin and Susan Ray. Well, jumping back to the area at the time that we were living on 2379 Glendale Boulevard. I don't know if it was before he got his job with the masonry company or maybe on weekends. But that place had a backyard, let's call it, that had a big grove of bamboo in the center that was circular. And the rest of it was kind of, nondescript, sandy, not very easy to walk on area. And our dad built a central cement base, and then he made cement blocks that he then created a backyard that could be walked on, and actually was aesthetically quite appealing. While there, I befriended a guy who was the son of the owner of the Red Lion Inn, which was kind of a German beer and German food place. And interestingly enough, at that time, one of the big TV shows was something called Combat with Vic Morrow. And Angelo, which was the guy's name, was a perfect little German kid. And apparently he appeared on some of those TV shows. We went to school at Clifford Street School. I don't know, did you go to school there?
I don't remember the name of the schools,
Mm-hmm.
but I went somewhere because I went to kindergarten in Buenos Aires, and then I was out of school for a period of time, and then at some elementary school where you were, I was there too, just briefly.
At that time, Leon Rudek got a job with the Jackson Masonry Company. So California is subject to earthquakes, and a lot of the filigreed decorations that they put on a lot of the California buildings had crashed down and injured people during earthquakes. And so California said, oh, okay, all buildings need to have flat surfaces, nothing hanging over it. And so this company would go in and tear down the things that stuck out of buildings and brace the buildings and repaired them and painted whatever. So Dad was working, and again, he was big and strong, and I guess they sent him on a scaffold to like a second story, and my understanding was that he was using a jackhammer or something like that, and he lost his balance. Apparently he did a somersault and landed on his ankles, and he fractured both ankles. And in those days, I don't know if today if they would do surgery, but in those days they reset the bones and they put them in two casts going from the knee down. And he was in that for several months. In the meantime, the Rays that we mentioned earlier, I guess took pity on us. They saw that he was going insane, doing nothing. And one of the two had a connection to a company called ITT General. They made electrical components, and so one day they bring a couple of instruments to make resistors. And what they would do is wind some wires around the matrix and then put a piece of tape on one side and then tape the two ends together, and they would periodically get orders, so he had something to do, keep him entertained, and they made a little income at the same time. A little sidelight is that we met a Polish family at that time. I think one of their girls was going to school at Clifford Street School. I don't recall if she was in actually.
Our family was Catholic from the time we got to
one day we
this
managed to get
country.
together, and that became a lasting friendship.
as we can see in Argentina and here
To
in the
this day.
United
To
States.
this day.
In the late
That
1960s,
was the Witkowskis, and the
Marta
oldest daughter,
was
Teresa,
converted to
she
Jehovah's
married Ed
Witness.
Kuhn, who also happened to work
and
at the other
there was a
Times.
bit of a schism between
Marta and
Teresa
Leon as a
Witkowska
result.
Kumor was the oldest child of the family and very accomplished. She was, among other things, an RN and an architect, and she wrote this book about the Hale House, which is a Victorian home destined for demolition and is now rescued and staying in Heritage Square in Los Angeles. And the matriarch of that family, and actually a couple of the kids, ended up working at the LA Times. So this is
The girl you met at school,
Mhm.
Anna, she worked at Times her whole life.
So from 2379, Glendale Boulevard, then we moved to, I think it's 4530 something, Fountain Avenue in Hollywood. This is like in the heart of Hollywood. That's where the house that was used as a home and office by the Jackson family that employed Dad. They bought a house near Silver Lake and moved the family, and they partitioned part of the house that was the office that they continued to use from the part of the house that we used for a year or two.
I seem to remember that it was a corner lot. The house was on the corner closest to the street, and the rest of the square was a yard where trucks can drive, and there was a shop back there or something. I remember something like that.
Right, and actually Dad built a structure. Basically there were steel pipes, I don't know, 6 inches in diameter, that made up the legs. Think of it as a table. And he actually, somehow he managed to pour cement in the upper portion, and they used that as extra added storage. But I mean, we're talking about something that was probably about 12 feet on each side, or maybe a little more. And yeah, they did store their trucks and their equipment as well there.
I think that was the house where I went to spend a little bit of time in some class. I think that was
Okay. And I was going to Los Feliz School. I mean, and we were walking at that time. We didn't have a school bus or anything like that. And that was kind of in the middle of Hollywood. And I used to walk by very near to the kind of famous Hollyhock house that Frank Lloyd Wright had designed. I don't know if it's a museum now or not. And that was around the time that President Kennedy was shot.
I remember.
Yeah, and there were also big fires that were burning Bel Air, which is one of the fanciest parts of Los Angeles. I remember seeing movies in class showing how cinders would go flying off from one neighborhood to another.
In fact, even though I have no recollection of going to school, I had a feeling that I did, but I must have, because when we moved to La Prada and I entered Annandale, I entered in the 2nd grade. So I must have somehow skipped the 1st grade because of what I did in the previous home.
So that skips us to the La Prada house. 6012 La Prada was, I think, originally built by a Polish couple by the name of Józefowski. And they were probably in their 70s when our parents bought that house. I thought it was interesting the way they financed it, because even though they made deposits into the Bank of America, the house was financed by the couple. This was not something that the bank had approved. The Józefowskis agreed to receive $100 a month for, I don't know what the term was, from our folks to sell that house. I don't know what they put as a deposit. But it was their house now, and long lot, unique street. It was a cul-de-sac, and I think it was the only residential street in Los Angeles that had grass islands going up and down in the center. And when we moved in, I think there maybe was one apartment house. And by the time.
2 or 3 maybe.
Yeah, perhaps, yeah.
But these lots were so gigantic that when those old people died off, their heirs sold it, and the apartment houses started popping up everywhere. One thing that I was curious about is that this hillside was an olive grove. And I thought, one day I asked myself, well, was this something the missionaries did? Which they did. The missionaries planted olives wherever they went. But our olive groves were because at the turn of that century, Canadians came down and they planted all those olive groves. But olive trees take forever to grow, and these, by the time we got there, these trees were ancient.
That's true, right? If we walked out of our kitchen, there was a part of that grove right there. I didn't know the backstory on that. That's great. We established our residence there, and our dad got a job with the Los Angeles Times, once again assisted by Mrs. Neutra. Mrs. Neutra, I think, was friends with
Buffalo.
Mrs. Buffum, who actually married Norman Chandler, who owned the Los Angeles Times. And so I think she wrote a letter saying, hey, I have some people I know that are really good and they could really use getting employment with you. And indeed, Dad got a job. And apparently, well, not apparently, I mean, it's no doubt that he fit in real well. He was very well respected in their machine shop. So he kept the paper running while the paper was almost in its prime.
John was born in 1966, and right about that time, Vladia, or Vladja, Marta's mother, had been visiting for about a year or so. In 1970, Marta returned to Argentina to visit her mother, who actually underwent surgery. We see John, Vladia, and Carlos, and one can appreciate what short stature Vladia had. Here we can see Daniel, Carlos's dad, and Vladia. This is a view of the last farm that was owned by the family. It was referred to as La Carolina, and we can see how flat the land is around Buenos Aires and some of the crops, including corn. In this scene, Jose Lukianishin, the Ukrainian fellow who was a good friend of Nicholas Palka, is leading the horse, bringing some hay. John and Carlos had a good time playing in the farm. And we see Marta visiting some of the good friends that Leon and Marta had. The fellow's name is Bachurra, and his wife is Mita, and here they're drinking mate. There's an Italian and a Polak drinking Argentine mate. And then comes the goodbye. house of La Prada was relatively small. It was 2 bedroom, 1 bath, and by now the family was 5 in number, including John, Norbert, Robert, Leon, and Marta. The decision was made to build an addition to the lower part of the front of the house, and a long room that was turned into a 2 bedroom with a very long balcony. This was used by Robert, Norbert, and John eventually. Both of us went to junior high school at Luther Burbank Junior High School, I think when it was still the old building, which was an architectural marvel.
An amazing thing built during the Depression out of brick. Massive, massive bricks. Of course, the 71 earthquake cracked it and we couldn't go back in those buildings.
Oh, they actually caused damage?
Yeah, because after that we were going to school in bungalows. And then they finally demolished it and built some cheap replica.
Yeah. We both attended Franklin High School, including John. John came along and he followed in the school footsteps. I think by the time John came along, our parents had become a little more relaxed about discipline and child rearing, or what do you think? Were they just tired because they didn't do it with us?
I think yes. He's 6 years older than I am, and I'm 9 years older than John. So I think they were worn out by the time John came by. And by the way, he didn't just go to high school. I just went to high school. He went there and he played varsity basketball, and I think, if I remember, you were #1 tennis.
For a brief time, that's correct. Yeah.
Which is impossible to do. I mean, if you ever go to see a high school tennis match, you can tell who the good guys are, because when the #1s play, the ball sounds like this, pop, 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 pop. When I play, it sounds like thump, thump, thump. So when I came along, the best I could do was junior varsity doubles. But it was fun.
Yeah, you participated. So
the coach
cool.
told me, I have no time for you whatsoever. Go in the corner and practice your serve. That was the only thing I could do. I could serve. But if I didn't ace that guy out, I was dead because I couldn't return the ball.
In 1973, Jan Rudek visited our family at La Prada. We can see him here with John. And actually, La Prada had very long stair case. And we can see that Jan, who was 82 at the time, was quite spry, going up and down those stairs without much difficulty. Leon took after Jan, as we have seen that Jan liked to do gardening, vegetable gardening, and here he gets to inspect the garden at 6012 La Prada. These are loquats they're picking. Jan lived another 15 years after this recording was made, dying on May 31st, 1988. Leon visited him in Poland at least once before he died. In this brief scene, we see almost the entire family together, with Mom, Marta, John, Grandpa Jan, Norbert, and Robert. Jan got transported to the Polish church we see here. He also got to see the Queen Mary in Long Beach, went to the beach, and had some parties thrown in his name. One unique situation was that he wanted to do cement work. Much to the chagrin of Leon, he was trying to fix the side steps.
In Czechoslovakia?
Austria.
Austria.
Same thing.
P-U-C-H.
Which we got out of the Sears catalog, and it came in a crate.
That's right. And it was a two-cycle engine, right? That you had to mix oil in with the gas.
If you remember that, then it must have been.
Yeah, and it fouled the spark plugs, which really made me very angry because you can't start the motorcycle if your spark plug is covered in oil. Then
You still carry that scar on your leg?
I do. I burned myself on the exhaust. And then you had a motorcycle, a Honda 350, right?
That's after I got into the academy. The old man bought me a motorcycle.
4 years in the academy, and you would come in back to California and do wheelies on it and go up to the top of the mountains. And
They
to the
would
ocean.
let me come home for Christmas for a couple of weeks, and then in the summer for a couple of weeks. And the old man bought me this. We went to Pasadena to the Honda shop, and I knew exactly the model that I wanted because this German guy that was a friend of Alfred's drove it, and I said, well, I want that one. So we bought it, and I had a route I followed every single day. First thing I would do is drive it up to Mount Wilson, where it was cold and icy, and then I would drive it down, go Sunset Boulevard out to the beach, drive it back through Watts, because I didn't like the freeways. I went surface streets every day.
In 1974, Vladia Palka immigrated to the United States and lived with a family at La Prada. She was a very quiet lady and actually highly respected by Leon Rudek, just because she was always hardworking and conciliatory. We see her going down these steps, which actually ended up being her undoing. Vladia developed dementia, and one night she started walking out in the stairs and suffered a pretty bad concussion and intracranial bleed. She still attended Catholic Church. And she attended Robert and Gay's wedding in 1975. The aforementioned intracranial bleed led her to be in an incapacitated state. Here, Danielle visits her in 1993.
Another family that became close to our family was the Bruckners. Paul Sr., Sylvia, Paul Jr., and George. Unfortunately, by now they're all gone under different circumstances. The dad used to go and spend every night over there. They'd play cards.
Bruckner was a Hungarian, and Hungarians are pocket Germans. So he spent World War II in a Panzer tank, and then somehow ended up in Argentina and married a local and had 2 kids and came up here.
Right. He was a carpenter, and he worked for what is now Rite Aid, but at that time was called Thrifties. And they came through Virginia. They came to the United States and Virginia, and finally came to California. And then we worked for a German gentleman, Alfred Breckemeyer. He was a painter.
Sweetest guy you ever meet.
Just the nicest guy. If I had been Alfred and I had been working for him, doing the things, some of the things I did, I would have fired me about 3 times, but he didn't. And besides that, one of the nice things about working with Alfred, and we worked on weekends and we worked most of the summers, was that we got to know Los Angeles because he got jobs in the Valley, in Hollywood, in Watts, Laguna.
All those little horseshoe apartments that you see on Melrose Place, they actually are apartments like that, and we painted them.
Yep. And Pink's Hot Dogs, at least I got to know it with Alfred because
He was right around the corner from the paint store, so I had plenty of the dogs there.
he used to buy paint in a paint store on Melrose, and you pass some of the movie studios to get there. So it was our introduction to Hollywood. Alfred bought a boat, and he would go fishing and take us. I went to Mexico with him one time too.
I made that trip, yeah.
Yeah, so those are fun memories. He had 2 daughters, one of whom passed away from breast cancer. The other one is living in Ventura. He divorced his original wife and remarried and had a son. So those were our Los Angeles time experiences.
Alfred was our second father.
That's true. And Alfred and Paul Bruckner were friends. I think that maybe is how we originally met Alfred, and got these jobs.
I call it the colony. There were lots of expats who moved up to Los Angeles. We all met each other, and we socialized with each other. Back then, people actually socialized. They would throw dinner parties, and people would come over. I've yet to throw one yet. And my dad was there every day visiting Paul Bruckner, and I'd go over there and visit with his sons.
In 1975, Norbert joined the United States Coast Guard Academy in New London, Connecticut. His memories are that that was a tough 4 years. Not only the weather, but the entire structure of the place. Nevertheless, he did overcome and graduate. In 1976, Norbert, as a cadet, took a cruise on the United States Coast Guard ship, the Campbell. You notice he has a very short haircut because he crossed the timeline, and he was met in San Francisco by Mom, Dad, and John, and they drove back to Los Angeles. These are scenes from the Coast Guard Academy at the time of Norbert's graduation. We can see Norbert marching with the rest of the cadets. Post-graduation, he gets hugs from Mom and Dad, and he gets his new designation as an ensign. In August of 1975, Robert and Gay are married in San Diego. They finish 2 years of graduate school at USC and then are accepted to medical school in Valparaiso, Chile. We used a couple of different apartments. This is their ID. This is anatomy class. This is Valparaiso. This is the medical school class in Chile. And this is a typical hospital room and hospital hallway and some classmates. In 1981, Gay and Robert were accepted for transfer to Loyola Stritch Medical School in Chicago. This was started in the third year, and after 2 years, they graduated. And in 1981, both started residencies in Kansas City, Missouri. Gay in family medicine in Lee's Summit. This was called Truman East. Robert was at Truman West near downtown Kansas City. These are several of his classmates. They bought a house in Lee's Summit. Sarah was born in Lee's Summit in 1987, and both sets of grandparents came over to see her. And now she has children of her own. And reference back to the time when Jan Rudik visited La Prada and he started doing cement work. Well, Leon and Marta visited us when Sarah was in 1987, and Leon just couldn't help himself, had to do what his father had done in his own house and do some cement work. Herbert and Leah were married in 1990, and they were joined by the entire family, including John, Robert, and Gay and Sarah. Leah and Norbert moved to Hong Kong, where he worked for Telerate. He then returned and eventually had children, namely Jake, who did get to meet Leon Rudik. When Anna came, Leon was gone, and Marta did visit, and they came to Los Angeles as well. Now they're completely grown up and in or just finished college. In 1991, Leon Rudik experienced some chest pain. Not severe, but enough that he went to the doctor. The doctor examined him and found that he'd had a massive heart attack. A normal heart would look like this, and his, because much of the muscle had died, started inflating like a balloon and not being able to work. The physicians resorted to a temporizing measure called an intra-aortic ventricular assist device, and that's like a cigar-shaped balloon that inflates and deflates to help to push the blood in the right direction, relieving the work that the ventricle of the heart has to do by decreasing the amount of pressure it has to push against. After conversations with a physician, it was determined that he was healthy enough before that it would be reasonable to consider a heart transplant, so he was transferred to UCLA and subsequently transferred to Cedars-Sinai in the hopes of finding a heart. He was in the hospital for 2 months before the actual transplant was performed. This is the post-transplant video. Today is the 28th of September. It's Saturday morning. We just got through spending some time with Dad. It's a huge hospital. Dad's over in there. Actually,
actually in the opposite corner to the one we're actually seeing. This is on 3rd Street and between 3rd Street and Beverly off of La Cienega.
Hi, Albert. Here with God's blessing, I can say hello to you with my new life.
That's right.
Thanks God.
This has been this is, since the clock doesn't work in the machine, today is the 6th of October, Saturday.
So how many days I live in my home?
Well, I think it's about, well, they did you on, I think it was Tuesday. So from one Tuesday, I think it's what, 2 weeks now? 2.5 weeks, something.
With my new heart?
Yeah. Amazing, huh?
I cannot believe it.
And we have big progress today. You can see no oxygen. He's breathing on his own.
Yeah. And
He has good appetite. He's walking.
Right.
Huh? Let's see. Stand up a little bit. I'll help you. That's wonderful. Okay.
and I can go to the bathroom by myself.
Also good news. Okay. Let's look at your zipper ones here.
Yeah,
There we go.
there it is.
Not too much, huh? Had a couple of chest tubes here at one time.
Yeah,
Probably a little pacemaker wire in there.
from both sides.
Yeah, you can see how skinny he is here, here.
Yeah, but that's, if I eat like I eat,
He'll get it all
I
back.
have no problem with that.
Too bad we don't have x-rays, movies from before the transplant, because he couldn't do this. He was coughing all the time because the
Yeah.
lungs didn't work.
No, I don't cough now.
That's right. Well, Mom was worried at first because she thought that Pop was going to be like an invalid when he got home. But that's, you know, he's already showing it big progress. He's walking,
Yes.
going to the bathroom on his own, starting to eat. So,
And that is very big help when you do that yourself.
I'm sure. Well, you lost a tremendous number of pounds. You were weighing 256 before the problem started. And that was what, 184?
180, 179 and hot.
Sure.
We really don't know what we got. But it's our life. But I thank the God for that. Going to be too.
That's right. Lots of people-
Enjoy your work.
Life sometimes seems really bad until you
Mhm.
almost realize that you don't have it anymore. you
Right.
know. You can start looking at the good things.
We're going to look at it different.
That's right.
And that's how we're going to enjoy it more.
Terrific.
All right. I wish you luck.
That's right. This fellow is going to go next month. He's going to Hong Kong for a couple
I
of
wish
weeks.
you lots of luck. And don't forget,
Oh, I'm sure he will call you and write.
that we are always thinking as a family, not as an independent.
That's right. No matter what, we're always a family. We're always together.
Nothing going to break us.
Fíjate si está enchufado y luego dale vuelta esas manijas. Más o menos. Proba, si no va de un lado, va del otro.
You know who that is? I have him always there.
Who is that cute little kid? That's
The one, the one.
So what do we have? Acyclovir, baby aspirin, Bactrim, Cardizem, cyclosporin, Imuran, potassium, Lasix, and magnesium, and nystatin, and calcium. Lots of great stuff.
Oye, agarradera.
Oop,
Wow.
almost. It's tough. One thing at a time, though, huh? Fantastic. Look at that. Pretty skinny guy. There he goes.
Robert, we should put an X marks the spot, huh?
Yeah.
Well, there actually is kind of an X mark, where his little insignia is.
Yeah.
That's where the new heart is, folks. Right there.
That's right, Thanksgiving 1991.
Yeah,
Yeah, I was
Isn't that
just
amazing?
complimenting him
there we are.
on, don't worry about anything now. He's so lucky that he's much better off than winning the lotto, because the lotto would probably just have gotten him into trouble.
Right.
And I'd sooner be lucky with the situation he had to face, as opposed to having a few $1,000s more money.
Right.
You bet. Okay, great. Thank you.
And that was, I'm here, and that was my last desire when I was hanging on one thread.
To be here one more time, huh?
Wanted to get
One more time.
That's right.
Yeah.
Well, I think we are ready to go.
After the transplant, Leon stayed busy, including riding his bicycle around the Rose Bowl in Pasadena, doing a rowing machine that he made at home, certainly working in his garden where he had some prize-winning tomatoes and other fruit. He also stayed busy in his shop, where he made a number of things, including toys like a carousel, as well as nutcrackers, and larger projects including enclosures to keep squirrels away in Robert's house in Riverside, also a rolling planter, as well as a compost drum device. He also visited the Los Angeles Times, where he worked for so many years on a number of occasions. Leon and Marta traveled to Poland on at least one occasion, and he is always a bit of a clown, so he had girls around him all the time. The three brothers actually enjoyed their time together, including Michał and his kids. And at least on one occasion they took Marta's brother, Daniel, along. And they celebrated the 50th anniversary in California.
Ja dobrze, ale jak się ma?
Też się dobrze ma, widzisz jak nie wygląda. No już gdzie idziemy? Już idziemy tam. Dzień dobry, ja nie mam.
Bóg miłosierny daje odkupienie.
Bóg miłosierny daje odkupienie.
Z głębokości wołam do Ciebie, Panie, Panie, wysłuchaj głosu mego. Nachyl swe ucho na głos mego błagania.
Bóg miłosierny daje odkupienie.
Aby moją za ofiarę przyjął Ojciec przeklątą. I powołał do społeczności zbawionych. Nasz Pan Jezus Chrystus powiedział: ja jestem zmartwychwstanie i życie. Kto wierzy we mnie, nie umrze na wieki. Tymi wiernymi, którzy nas poprzedzili do wiecznej Ojczyzny, módlmy się, jak nas nauczył nasz stanie. Wysłuchaj prośby, które my grzeszni zanosimy za Twojego sługę Leona. Wyzwól go z więzów śmierci i daj mu udział w radościach raju z Twoimi świętymi. Ufamy, że wskrzesi ciało naszego brata, gdy przyjdzie w chwale. Dobry Jezu, a nasz Panie, daj mu wieczne spoczywanie.
After Leon died, Marta sold the property at 601 La Prada. She had a very good friend named Fini, and Fini had a house with an available room, and they shared the kitchen. She had, of course, a lot of friends that were friends of Fini as well, and they did a lot of things together. She had, among other surgical procedures, a total knee replacement, which she had challenges doing rehab. She traveled to see her grandchildren in Florida, went to Niagara Falls, went to Argentina a couple of times, where she was together with a close friend, Olga Pilipchuk, and her daughter Anna. She also visited with Carlos. She later had colon cancer surgery. She had 2 colon cancers removed at once and recovered quite well from that. She had the chance to meet and see her 2 grandchildren by Sarah. She subsequently moved to a board and care facility in Pasadena in 2017. Here we see her with a lot of her grandchildren. We had a lunch with friends. COVID hit. And Marta did overall quite well, although she declined slowly and eventually just died in April of 2022.
So we were just looking at the book of sort of genealogy that I made for the kids, and she saw the old pictures of her parents and her family in Poland and that. I think she liked that.
It's okay now. We've had a lot of rain lately.
Oh yeah?
That helps.
Yeah, not California rain, Mexico rain. It comes across and really lots of wind and lots of water.
Wow. You needed that.
Yeah, we like it. It's okay.
Okay.
I know
All
that.
right.
I know that.
All right. We'll see you.
Yes.
Thanks for calling.
All right.